Have you ever loved someone so deeply that their words became the reason you rebuilt your entire life? What if one sentence, just one, shattered your world, but unknowingly built the foundation of your destiny? That's what happened to me 50 years ago. In Miami, my name is Margaret Dawson, but most people today call me Grandma Maggie. They know me as the founder of one of the largest women-led handmade jewelry empires in the country. But what they don't know is that this empire was born from heartbreak, from one night, from one sentence. The year was 1972, Miami Beach. The sun was melting into the ocean, painting the water with shades of gold and crimson. The air smelled like salt and summer, warm, gentle, almost comforting. I remember the waves brushing against the pier, the faint sound of jazz coming from a little cafe nearby, and the city lights beginning to blink awake, one by one. I was 27, young, hopeful, maybe a little naive. Back then, I believed life was supposed to be simple. You work hard, love deeply, and somehow, everything falls into place. But life, as I learned that evening, doesn't work that way. I was working at a small craft shop on Ocean Drive, designing jewelry, mostly handmade pieces with little stones and metals I could afford. They weren't expensive, but every piece told a story. My dream wasn't about money or fame. I just wanted to create something beautiful, something that lasted. And then there was James Porter. He was everything I wasn't: confident, sharp, ambitious, and always in a hurry to reach somewhere bigger. He wore success like a second skin, and I adored him. We had been together for 3 years. I truly thought he was the one. That night, when he asked to meet at our favorite spot, the pier at South Point, I was sure he was going to propose. I'd even put on the little white dress he once said made me look like sunshine. But when I saw him standing there, his face didn't carry the smile I knew. Something in his eyes told me this wasn't a night of beginnings. It was a night of endings. He didn't waste time. He just looked at me, quiet, distant, and said, "Maggie, we need to talk." Those 5 words, they can freeze time. Every woman who's ever loved someone knows exactly what comes next. I tried to smile, tried to keep it light. "What's wrong?" I asked. He took a breath, looked at the ground. Then he said, "You're wonderful, Maggie. You have such a kind heart, but you're not ambitious enough for me." For a moment, I thought I misheard him. He continued, "I can't spend my life with someone who's content with so little. You make beautiful things, but you don't want more. I want more." I just stood there. The sound of the ocean faded. Even the music from the cafe went silent. The only thing I could hear was my heart breaking. He didn't shout. He didn't cry. He just turned and walked away. No goodbye, no look back, just the echo of his shoes fading into the night. I stayed on that pier long after he was gone, the waves whispering beneath me, the wind cold against my face. The world felt so big, and I suddenly felt so small. When I finally stood up, I took off my heels and walked home barefoot. My hands were shaking. My mind kept replaying his words. "You're not ambitious enough for me." Those words followed me into every corner of my small apartment. They sat beside me as I stared at the jewelry pieces I had made, the ones he used to say were cute. And then I broke. I cried until I couldn't anymore. The kind of cry that leaves your chest hollow. I remember whispering into the darkness, "Maybe he's right. Maybe I'm not enough." But somewhere between those tears and that silence, something shifted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sudden, just a quiet, burning feeling, like a spark deep inside me that refused to die. If I wasn't ambitious enough for him, then I would become something he could never imagine, not to prove him wrong, but to prove to myself that I was never the small dream he thought I was. From that night forward, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't chase anyone ever again. I would chase purpose. That was the night I stopped being the girl who waited for someone's approval and started becoming the woman who would one day build an empire. ***, the morning after that night in Miami, everything felt quieter. The sun still rose over the ocean, but it looked different somehow, like even the light had lost its warmth. I woke up on the couch, surrounded by sketches, broken jewelry pieces, and empty coffee cups. My eyes burned from crying, and my mind replayed James's words over and over again. "You're not ambitious enough for me." Those words felt like a stain I couldn't wash off. For days, I barely ate, barely spoke. I went to the shop, smiled for customers, came home, and cried again. But slowly, something started to change. You see, pain is strange. It doesn't stay pain forever. Sometimes, it hardens into strength. One evening, about a week later, I was sitting by my work table, staring at a half-finished silver pendant I'd started before the breakup. It had no design, just a plain oval, waiting for purpose. I picked it up, and for some reason, I carved a single word into it. Enough. It wasn't for anyone else. It was for me. That pendant became my first real design. Raw, imperfect, but honest. I wore it the next day, and that's when something happened. A woman at a small cafe stopped me and said, "That's a beautiful necklace. Where did you buy it?" I smiled for the first time in days and said softly, "I made it." She asked if I could make one for her daughter. Then another customer overheard, and just like that, a spark lit in the dark. That week, I made 6 pendants, each one by hand, each one carved with a different word: brave, hope, rise, free, enough, and begin. I sold them all at a tiny street market by Collins Avenue for $15 each. It wasn't about the money. It was about the feeling. That little voice inside me whispering, "See? You can." I started spending nights at my desk, crafting pieces until dawn. My fingers would ache, my eyes would burn, but my heart, it felt alive again. Cinematic visual cue, slow montage: a small apartment lit by a single lamp, tools scattered across the table, Maggie's hands moving fast, polishing silver, stringing beads, a coffee cup beside her, always half empty, rain tapping the window as she hums softly to herself. Her dream is being born quietly, without witnesses, without applause. But dreams are fragile things, and the world doesn't make it easy for women who dare to dream alone. When I tried to sell my jewelry to boutique owners, they smiled politely and then said things like, "It's nice, but not what our customers want. Maybe if you made something a little more trendy." That word haunted me for months. They didn't want meaning. They wanted glitter. I started doubting myself again. Maybe James was right. Maybe I wasn't ambitious, just foolish. But every night, when I sat down to work, I'd touch that old pendant, the one that said enough, and something inside me would whisper, "Keep going, Maggie. Just one more day." I began selling jewelry on the boardwalk, right beside the ocean. People would pass by, most without a glance. But sometimes, one person would stop. They'd pick up a necklace, hold it to the light, and ask, "What does this word mean to you?" And I'd tell them my story. Not all of it, just enough. Enough for them to see that pain could be turned into something beautiful, little by little. I began to understand. I wasn't selling jewelry. I was selling healing. Every word I carved was a piece of my heart. Every sale, a promise to the woman I used to be. A few months later, I'd saved enough money to rent a small corner inside a gift shop. Not much. Just one glass shelf with a little nameplate that read, "Handcrafted by M. Dawson." I remember standing there on opening day, my hands trembling, my heart racing. The shop owner told me not to expect much, but that afternoon, a young woman bought a bracelet that said "Brave." She smiled and whispered, "I needed this today." And that's when I knew. This was more than survival. This was purpose. Miami sunsets passed one after another. The heartbreak didn't vanish. It transformed. And with each piece I made, I felt that version of me, the girl on the pier, barefoot and broken, fade just a little more into memory. But I never forgot her, because she was the reason I began. That's how dreams start. Not with applause, not with money, but with pain, and the courage to keep moving through it. That small spark, that street market, those first 6 pendants, they were the beginning of what would one day become Maggie Dawson Designs, and the foundation of an empire I didn't yet know I was building. Success doesn't arrive all at once. It tiptoes in quietly, and sometimes leaves just as quietly. By 1976, 4 years after that night on the pier, I had built something small but steady. My jewelry was selling in 3 different Miami boutiques. I had a small team, 2 young women who helped me craft and polish the pieces. It wasn't wealth, but it was life. It was meaning, and I was proud. But life, I've learned, has a cruel way of testing your strength. Just when you start to believe you're safe. It began with the recession of '77. Shops closed. Tourists disappeared. People stopped buying pretty things. The boutiques that carried my jewelry began returning boxes of unsold stock. My savings melted like ice in the sun. I sold my car, then my furniture, then my sewing machine, just to pay rent. One night, I sat on my apartment floor surrounded by boxes of unsold jewelry. I picked up a bracelet, one that said faith. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was all I had left. A week later, one of my helpers, a sweet girl named Clara, came to me crying. She said she couldn't keep working for free. I didn't blame her. I couldn't even promise her the next week's pay, so she left. And suddenly, the little room that once buzzed with music and chatter felt silent. I thought about quitting. I really did. Because there's something terrifying about watching your dream die in slow motion. One night, it rained hard. One of those Miami storms that sound like the sky is breaking apart. I sat by the window, holding a cup of cold coffee, staring out into the city lights. And for the first time in years, I whispered to the empty room, "James, you were right. I wasn't ambitious enough." But the words didn't sting like they used to. They sounded hollow, untrue, because deep down, I knew. This wasn't about ambition anymore. This was about faith. The next morning, drenched in tiredness and resolve, I walked to the bank. I asked for a small business loan, something to help me restart, to keep my workshop alive. The banker looked at me, a middle-aged woman in a thrift store dress, holding handmade jewelry in a box, and said, "We don't usually give loans to craft sellers. Mrs. Dawson, you don't have collateral." I smiled weakly. "Then you can keep my dreams as collateral. They're all I've got." He laughed politely, then denied my application. That walk home was long. The kind of walk that makes you question everything. Your choices, your worth, your future. The Miami heat pressed down heavy, and by the time I reached my building, I was shaking. Not from the sun, but from exhaustion. But destiny has strange timing. As I was walking up the stairs, a young woman, someone I'd never met, stopped me. She was wearing one of my necklaces, one of the old ones I'd sold years ago at the street market. She said, "You're Maggie Dawson, right? My mom gave me this necklace when she was sick." She said it reminded her to stay strong. It really helped me. I just froze. That moment, those simple words, hit me harder than any storm, because it reminded me why I started. Not for money, not for ambition, but for connection, for meaning. That night, I made a decision. I took every last dollar I had and bought supplies, silver, stones, tools, whatever I could find. And I worked. I worked through the nights, through hunger, through doubt, through tears. We see Maggie in a dimly lit workshop, her hands trembling as she polishes each piece. Stacks of bills beside her, a calendar with crossed-out days, a radio playing faint old jazz in the background. Her apartment becomes her world, a space filled with light, shadow, and relentless willpower. A few months later, something unexpected happened. A local newspaper published a small article titled, "Miami's Hidden Gem: The Woman Who Crafts Words into Jewelry." It was just a 2-paragraph feature, but it changed everything. Orders began to arrive by mail. Letters from women across Florida, each asking for pieces with words like courage, survive, faith. Stories of loss, recovery, heartbreak, healing. They came with every order. And with each one, I realized something profound. I wasn't selling jewelry anymore. I was helping women rebuild their strength, just like I had rebuilt mine by 1981. I had enough saved to open my first tiny store. It wasn't much, a single room near Coral Gables with wooden shelves and a faded sign that read, "Maggie Dawson Designs." I remember unlocking the door for the first time. My hands were shaking, and my heart whispered, "You made it through the storm." Looking back now, I understand. Success isn't a straight road. It's a storm. And the ones who survive aren't always the smartest or the richest. They're the ones who keep standing when the rain won't stop. And on those long nights, when I was scared and alone, I would hold that first pendant, the one that said enough, and remind myself, even storms have to end. By 1987, 15 years had passed since that night on the pier in Miami. And if you had told me back then that the girl who once cried over a broken heart would one day see her name in Forbes' women's issue, I would have laughed. But there it was, Maggie Dawson Designs, now one of the most beloved jewelry brands in Florida. What started with a single pendant carved with the word enough had grown into something far greater. An empire built by hand, heart, and 1,000 sleepless nights. We had 50 employees, 2 boutiques, and customers across the country who wore my jewelry not as fashion, but as faith. Sometimes, I'd stand by the window of my Coral Gables store, watching women browse through our display cases, smiling, touching, remembering. And I'd whisper to myself, "You did it, Maggie. You really did it." But life never lets you write the final chapter too soon. Because one morning, while sorting through the mail at my office, I found a letter. A simple white envelope. No return address. Just my name, written in a handwriting I hadn't seen in over a decade. I froze. My hands trembled as I traced the letters. Margaret. It was James. I didn't open it right away. I left it on my desk for 3 days, staring at it, avoiding it, pretending it didn't matter. But on the third night, after everyone had gone home, I finally tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The first line read, "I saw your article in Forbes. I'm proud of you, Maggie." My chest tightened. I kept reading. "You were always more than I could see back then." I've thought about that night for years. I was wrong. You didn't lack ambition. I lacked vision. I'm in Miami again. I'd like to see you. One last time. I sat there, staring at his words, feeling everything and nothing all at once. He was the man who once said I wasn't enough, and now he wanted to meet. 2 days later, I agreed. We met at a small cafe near Biscayne Bay, the same place where we used to sit and dream when we were young. When I saw him, I barely recognized him. His hair had grayed. His face was lined with years. But his eyes, they were the same. Sharp, searching, confident. Except now, they carried something new. Regret. He smiled softly. "You look incredible, Maggie. Successful. Happy." I nodded politely. "You look older." He laughed, quietly, awkwardly, and then the silence settled between us, heavy and familiar. Finally, he said, "I was wrong about you." I looked at him for a long time, and then I said something I hadn't planned, something that came from the calm of a healed heart. "You weren't wrong, James. Back then, I wasn't ambitious. At least not in the way you understood ambition. You measured it in money. I measured it in meaning. You chased the world. I built my own." He lowered his eyes, and for the first time, I saw tears glisten at the corners. "I wish I'd seen that sooner," he whispered. I smiled. "Maybe you weren't meant to." We sat there in silence, to old souls with too many memories between them. He told me about his life, his failed marriages, his empty success, his loneliness. And I listened, not with anger, but with understanding, because time softens even the sharpest edges. Before we parted, he reached into his jacket pocket and handed me something, a small velvet box. Inside was a pendant, gold, simple, with one word engraved on it. "Sorry." I looked at it, smiled faintly, and closed the box. "Keep it," I said. "I already forgave you years ago. You just didn't know it yet." He nodded, eyes glistening, and stood up. He looked at me one last time and said, "You really did build an empire, Maggie." I smiled. Yes, but it started with a broken heart, and that's something no business plan could ever teach. Then he walked away, just like he had all those years ago on the pier. But this time, I didn't break. This time, I watched him go with peace in my heart, knowing that I had already written the ending to the story he thought was over. That night, I went home and opened my old jewelry box, the one where I'd kept my first pendant. Enough. It was scratched and faded now, but still whole. I held it in my hand and whispered to the girl I used to be, "You made it. You were always enough." And for the first time in a long, long while, I cried again, not out of pain, but out of gratitude. The years passed quietly after that. The empire grew, and so did I. By the time I turned 70, Maggie Dawson Designs had stores across the country. But success no longer thrilled me the way it once did. I had learned that life's real treasure isn't in numbers or headlines. It's in moments, in people, in peace. These days, I spend my mornings in a rocking chair on the porch of my little beach house in Key Biscayne. The waves hum softly, just like they did all those years ago in Miami. Except now, I'm not that heartbroken girl anymore. Now, I'm the woman who turned pain into purpose. Sometimes, young women visit my shop, eyes full of dreams and fear, asking me the same question. How did you do it, Mrs. Dawson? How did you build it all? And I smile, because the answer is simpler than they expect. I didn't build an empire to prove him wrong. I built it to prove to myself that I was always enough, even when the world told me I wasn't. But one afternoon, something special happened, something that reminded me that life always finds a way. To complete its story, my granddaughter, Emma, was visiting for the weekend. She's 16, full of questions, full of life. She found an old wooden box in my study, dusty, worn, tied with a faded blue ribbon. "Grandma, what's this?" she asked, holding it gently. I smiled. That, sweetheart, is the story of how everything began. Inside the box were the things I'd kept for 50 years. The first sketch I ever drew, the letter James sent, and that old silver pendant carved with one word. Enough. Emma turned it over in her hands, her eyes soft. "You made this yourself?" I nodded. "Yes. On the night I thought my life was over." She looked confused. "Why would you keep something that reminds you of sadness?" I reached over and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Because, my dear, sadness isn't something to run from. It's something to learn from. That pendant doesn't remind me of who broke me. It reminds me of who I became afterward." The wind outside picked up, carrying the sound of the sea through the window. Emma slipped the pendant over her neck and smiled. "It's beautiful," she whispered, and in that moment, something inside me felt complete, as if the circle that began on a rainy night in Miami had finally closed. That evening, we sat on the porch together, to generations, watching the sunset fade into gold. Emma rested her head on my shoulder and said, "Grandma, was it worth it? All of it?" I smiled softly. Every tear, every mistake, every lonely night. Because if I hadn't been broken back then, neither of us would be sitting here right now. She stayed quiet for a moment, then whispered, "I want to be strong like you." I looked out at the ocean, the same ocean that once carried away a younger woman's tears, and said, "You already are, sweetheart." Strength isn't loud, it's quiet. It's waking up after you've been shattered, and deciding to keep going anyway. The screen fades to Maggie's jewelry workshop, old photos on the walls, her granddaughter working beside her, shaping metal and engraving words just like her grandmother once did. We see the pendant enough framed on the wall above the counter, a reminder of where it all began. Then, in a soft, trembling voice, Maggie closes her narration. "They say love broke me once, but the truth is, love built me too. Just not the kind I expected. Not the love that leaves. The love that stays. The love you build within yourself, when no one else believes." The camera pans out slowly, the ocean glistening under the Miami sun. Maggie's laughter fades gently into the sound of waves, and the final words appear on screen. "You are enough. Always were. Always will be." You know, life has a way of breaking us just enough to see what we're truly made of. When I think back to that night in Miami, the heartbreak, the tears, the words that once cut so deep, I don't feel pain anymore. I feel gratitude. Because if I hadn't been told you're not ambitious enough, I would have never discovered how powerful I really was. Sometimes, it takes losing everything to understand that what you needed was never outside of you. It was inside you all along. So if you're listening to this right now, and someone has made you feel small, or unworthy, or not enough, I want you to remember something. You are not defined by who leaves you. You're defined by who you become after they're gone. The world will measure you by money, status, success, but your true value, your real worth, comes from how much of your heart you're willing to keep open, even after it's been broken. There will be storms, moments when everything you built feels like it's falling apart. When people walk away, when the dream feels too heavy to carry. But that's when your story truly begins. Because pain is not the end, it's the invitation. An invitation to rebuild, to rise again, to prove that you can take every no, every rejection, every heartbreak, and turn it into something beautiful. And one day, when you look back, you won't thank the ones who believed in you right away. You'll thank the ones who didn't, because they showed you what you could do when no one else believed. So here's my advice to you, my dear listener. When someone tells you you're not enough, smile gently and say, maybe not for you, but I am more than enough for my purpose. Don't chase validation. Don't chase approval. Build yourself quietly. Build something so strong, so meaningful, that one day, even the people who doubted you will whisper, I was wrong. And when that day comes, don't look back with bitterness. Look back with peace, because forgiveness is the final victory. Remember, empires don't always rise from power. Sometimes they rise from heartbreak, from the courage to start again when you've been torn apart, from the belief that even broken things can still shine. So, wherever you are tonight, whether you're healing, rebuilding, or just holding on, carry this truth with you. You are enough. You always were, and you always will be. End of story. Her confession from Miami.